talk about the things that you do.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Dion Custer Edwards, and I am at the Wexner Center for the Arts. I'm also a practicing artist, and always navigating those two things, plus many, many others. I have been in this field of arts education and arts practice for almost 25 years now, and really started off working in community spaces, which maybe we'll get to a little bit later on, and then really kind of fell in love with working in learning environments. So I worked a lot in schools for a majority of my career, and then I have been at the Wexner Center for the Arts, which is an arts center. It's kind of, you can kind of think of it as a kind of museum environment. It's not exactly that, but our colleagues are in museums and other art centers, but we're a multidisciplinary arts center at Ohio State University. I've been there about 16 and a half years, almost 17 years, and working in learning and public practice. The work that I do is the education arm of the institution. So prior to that, the department was known as the education department. And then we'll maybe talk about this, get some point to talk about this. We changed the name because our practices were changing and needed to change. And so now I head that department, and have been heading that department for a couple of years, and excited about sort of talking a little bit about what that means. So happy to be here. Thank you for including me.
Jeez. Zoom today, I don't know. Courtney, would you like to expand on your introduction?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. My name is Courtney Barton. I'm the Program Director for Arts and Culture and Racial Equity Initiatives at the Cleveland Foundation. The Cleveland Foundation is the world's first community foundation. To this day remains one of the larger community foundations in the country. Arts and culture has been a full program area for grant making of the Cleveland Foundation since the late 1970s. And I joined the foundation as a graduate fellow, first in 2018, where I did research in racial equity and philanthropy. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, originally went back to New York, graduated, and was offered this position at the Cleveland Foundation, and returned for it to really help begin to build a strategy for arts and culture grant making, to the point of this panel. That really lifted up community arts, that looked beyond perhaps a sole focus on the mid to large organizations of the Western European canon, and think about how we can think of arts and culture as it rightfully is here in Northeast Ohio as a prime economic driver, how we can think about arts and culture as it is listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a basic human right. And therefore, with that in mind, how that makes us show up as a foundation in our arts and culture grant making. The other part of my title, the Racial Equity Initiatives piece, really grow out of our response to all of the events of 2020, including the protests here in Cleveland. But it allowed us, I think, to test and pilot some initiatives, or expand a test of some initiatives, focusing on making grants to organizations that are led by people of color specifically. We launched a fund called the Cleveland Black Futures Fund, which is for Black-led organizations broadly. It builds on the work that we had done previously in what is now known as the Equity in the Arts Fund, specifically designed to support arts organizations led by people of color, and or to provide fellowships for artists of color. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And then last but not least, Jackie, would you like to expand on your introduction?
Hi, everyone. And again, thank you for including me on this amazing panel. Vesta, I'm so sorry that we can't see you talking to us. Miss you.
I'm too. Hi, Jackie.
Yeah. Anyways, would be normally the benefit of Zoom, being able to connect with our faraway colleagues. So I guess an interesting fact is that Transit Arts is the third part of an organization that started 30 years ago in the Short North. So this is our third incarnation. So we worked in the Short North before. For those of you who don't know Columbus, the Short North was a pretty rough neighborhood with a lot of violence, shootings, crime. The feds were coming in because of the Short North Posse and all this craziness. And now it's become this very gentrified shishi area. So we were there before it became fancy. And so the cool thing is that the artists and the young people who were working with us 30 years ago, we are now working, either the artists who are working with us were young people. So both artists and administrators, our whole team came up through the program, except for those who were adults at that time. And then we're also getting the children of the children who used to be at the program all those years ago. So I used to not have white hair. So anyways, another very exciting thing for us right now is that we've always been a very small program with a lot of partners. But this year, maybe a blessing of the pandemic is that we were able to expand in a huge way to do a large public art employment program to employ 45 young people ages 16 to 24, and then to also employ a host of artists who are either mentoring artists or contract artists who are working with the kids on their special projects. So that has been a phenomenal opportunity to support our artists and these young creatives that is keeping us really busy, but it's really exciting. So
you so much for sharing your introduction. I see, Dr. Daniel, we can see you now.
yay.
And so I think we have a few questions lined up for this panel, and this is supposed to be a more of a conversational style panel. But just thinking about the title of this panel, right, the powers and potentials, I think there's a lot that we could cover in a conversation with those two words. And I was just wondering, with all of your varied work, what experiences come to mind with those two words, and thinking about community work, community arts, community engagement, and the things you've done. And I won't highlight any one person. Any of you, if you feel so inclined, can jump at it. Oh, Dr. Daniels, are you talking? You may have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
I think you asked a question, but I was in a dead zone. So it kind of goes in and out. I'm on my phone now. You can see me, I understand.
Yes,
And you can hear me okay?
yes.
Okay. Hi, Jackie.
Hello.
So I'm sorry, what was the question that you just asked? I didn't hear any of that.
So the question, so the question was just thinking about the title of this panel, and those two words, the power and potentials, and what experiences come to mind when thinking about those two words, and particularly with community arts and community engagement and the work that you've done. And if you want to take a shot at answering that question, greatly appreciated.
I will. One of the things I was thinking about, or one of the many things I was thinking about, is how, as we watch the way that our country and our world is progressing right now, we can see just in a general sense, and have been able to see for decades, how powerful community activism is, whether or not it is connected to art. And that sometimes for example, what the law of the land tells us can be overturned by what the community tells us. And so I think that when we speak the language of art, which we know can be, but not always is, universal, that we capture that potential, that possibility of being able to be more vocal, more active, more participatory, more inquiring. And there are some negatives, some downsides too. But anyway, I'll just start there, that we understand that community behavior can surpass that of even the law.
I think that was a very powerful answer to the very
Mhm.
first question. Would anyone else like to expand on that or provide something in addition to what Dr. Daniels just said?
I'll say, I think just the ability to provide safer spaces for people to be vulnerable and to listen and learn from each other. Working with teens, they will tell you anything you need to know without hesitation, whether you want to hear it or not. And so it's a constant educational process. And I think that when we can bring together intergenerational communities to be able to hear from each other and to be able to use that creative space to navigate those difficult conversations, it just makes a better community. And just, it's been really exciting to see how that's evolved over the years.
You know, I think that I have a complicated relationship with the idea of power. So I'm constantly thinking about what that means for me and my work. I think there's, I don't know, power has this interesting perception and has interesting way of existing in the world. And I just am constantly thinking about whether or not power is available to me. But I think that is can be perceived, right? If you have a particular title or you're in a particular context, power can be sort of this perceived thing. I think in some ways, what I'm really grateful for is a kind of agency, is a kind of path making. So maybe it's maybe not power, but it's path making. It's kind of carving out some things with others, right? Community, both Dr. Daniel and Jackie have talked about community, and so how communities can carve out these pathways and how you might have partnerships with folks that you'll never meet, right? But you've carved something out and you've left a fertile ground and you trust that the partnership is coming, right? That, you know, that's that kind of multi-generational or intergenerational that Jackie also spoke about. And I do think that is exciting. I think the potential has a kind of have these skills that go along with it that I think art, the skill set of the arts does not get enough credit for, or is not articulated enough in the circles that talk about skill building and talk about life skills. I like this idea that Courtney brought into the fold around arts and culture as a basic human right. And that is really powerful notion. And as I think about arts education and how different it is now in a public school education and how maybe different it was, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Maybe it's this, maybe some folks it's the same depending on where you go to school, and for others it dramatic decline, particularly in the public schools. So when I think about potential, I definitely think about the kinds of skills and experiences that arts programming, arts education, arts experiences really do allow for a kind of human development that I think little else does, right? The arts, I think, can develop a kind of skill set that is really applicable no matter what the field someone decides to go into. I think that a good sort of strong foundation of arts education, whether it's dance or music or visual arts or creative writing or, you know, whatever the, you know, and everything in between, right? There's so many disciplines out there, so many mediums you can work in. That potential really is being able to know that you have an imagination and you you can use it, right? You have the agency. So maybe that's where the power comes from, right? Is this idea that you have the agency to use your imagination, like imagination is allowed here, right? Or that you can be curious. Dr. Daniel talked about inquiry, right? Like you could be curious about different things. And sometimes change comes with a kind of persistent curiosity, right? You can kind of continue to question, continue to inquire about something, continue to say that, I guess this is fine here, but what if it was this, or what if it was this, and what if we tried this? And art has this way of allowing us to experiment and take some kinds of risks as we're going through an inquiry kind of process. And so when I see the words power and potential, those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about.
And, if I may, I have been wrestling with my own relationship to power, or not just in this conversation, but sort of broadly working at a funder. Funders have a lot of power. It hasn't always been used responsibly or in consideration for what people actually want in their communities. And so at the risk of being incredibly too academic, when I think about community engagement, I think about Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, thing that, looking at in graduate school, but this idea that there are levels to community engagement, right? One of the things that sometimes philanthropy defaults to, especially in the early stages, are the lower rungs of the ladder, where people are asked to give a whole lot of their time and energy and maybe their opinion, and don't get a lot back that actually reflects the things that their communities really need. Which is often, Dion, to your point, when we think about what is happening in terms of arts access or support in schools, in public schools, in communities where you have institutions that don't have big endowments or marketing budgets and things of that nature, we get a whole lot less in terms of actually reflective engagement. But at the same time, that is the place where the potential for organizing with a cultural or artistic lens is perhaps the most powerful.
Can I add a quick thing that I should have said earlier, is that one thing we've learned over the years is that, everybody knows, you can have all the talent in the world, all the knowledge, but if you're not at the table or you don't have the right connections, the social capital, you're going to have a much harder road. And so that's been a really important part of our program, to make sure that no matter where we go, our young people, our young creatives are going with us and having those conversations, being seen and heard by the people who are decision makers. And we've had some pretty amazing things happen as a result. So it's that's been a good journey.
Yeah, I really kind of want to follow that thread that happened towards the end part of this question, where Dion starts to provide a more nuanced understanding of the word power and the things that we should consider, that Courtney and Jackie and Dr. Daniel also hinted to or pointed to. And one of the questions that we have is engaging with communities, engaging with diverse populations. It requires a high level of cultural consciousness and care. And I'm really interested to hear about kind of those ethical considerations that I think we started to talk about towards the end of this question, when engaging directly with communities, and how we're supporting those folks, and how we're even at times protecting those folks when we're engaging with them in our work. So if anybody would want to answer that question or have some insight.
Well, one of the things that I often say, just within my own organization, I'm a Black woman, but that doesn't mean I know what every Black person wants or needs in the world, right? I mean, I have many decades of experience being a Black person, so I have some insight, but it's not enough to just say we have a Black program director, therefore the trust has been built, or we have done what we needed to do. what you can see often in institutions that decide that they want to perhaps engage in community, especially beginning to engage in marginalized communities, is that they think that by hiring somebody that takes care of the work. When in fact, that is perhaps the start of the work that needs to be done. And what really has to be done is going to be a number of years of internal reflection about how an organization operates. Does it operate equitably? Does it operate inclusively? Does it foster a sense of belonging, even among its staff? Because that's going to translate to the work that the organization or institution will do in the community. I think we see this often with organizations that perhaps up to this point have not had a particular outlook on stating inclusion as a value, not necessarily attempting to be exclusive, but haven't embraced going out of their way to be inclusive. So when you decide that you're going to do that, that means your organization, then something's going to have to happen. Some reflection is going to have to happen with you. It's not just going to be a matter of inviting people in, but what is it that you're going to do? You can invite people over to dinner, but if you tell them not to touch anything, don't eat, then what is the point of that? And those are the questions that I think take significantly longer to answer. It's not a linear path. It's, not a straight trajectory. And those are the, questions that I would say the Cleveland Foundation has been grappling with, just broadly, having adopted in the last year or so, a consideration of power and equity at the core of everything that we do. Okay, so what does that mean? What does it mean that we are going to be talking about power and equity in everything that we do? And I can certainly tell you, with regard to arts and culture, talking about power and equity with regard to arts and culture was an entirely new consideration for some people as we got into the depth of planning. People were like, but aren't arts organizations just doing great work? Sure, but are they inclusive? Are they being representative? How can we help organizations to do that?
Those are such important topics you raise, Courtney. There's so many directions you can go in. I think that the thing to remember, particularly being in an institution, and these are the conversations we're having at the Wexner Center for the Arts, is, the way that I think about it is, it's not lost on me that I am inside of the institution. We are in the institution, and the institution's practices. When you're inside of the institution, you are a part of the institution's practices. You become aware of an organization's practices. You can become complicit in those practices. And it's something that is, that I'm constantly thinking about and challenged by, and so similar to what Courtney raised in terms of the Cleveland Foundation, the Wexner Center for the Arts, I've been doing equity work at the Wexner Center for the Arts for a really long time. It's really the way I work. I don't know how to work any other way. There are different iterations of the acronym. When we're thinking about belonging and we're thinking about inclusion, diversity, accessibility, equity, there's different ways that we can sort of throw those letters together to mean a thing or many things. But when I think about this work, I think about that it requires a kind of endurance and a kind of willingness to transcend all the different modes and ways of that this work might show up, particularly within organizations. I really like, Courtney, that you raised the point, and I think this is an important one, is that the infrastructure must meet the needs of any body of equity work. And so if you are not looking inside the institution at the infrastructure and saying who's doing this work and how is that work getting done, and is there a kind of appetite for an enduring kind of equity work, or does a statement feel really good right now and then we'll just sort of table it and get back to whatever else we were doing, or do we trouble that always? And I think the troubling always is where that work is hard but critical. And so one of the things that we're doing inside of our organization is really is looking across the organization at the infrastructure and thinking about what are the opportunities where equity work can not only sort of be pointed to, or we can start somewhere, but then how can we build a kind of enduring kind of work? We're looking at the budget, because if we're not looking at the budget, not sure how equity work can sustain itself. So it really does need to it needs to be resourced. And looking and thinking about institutions that have a long history of not being inclusive, it definitely resonates with me, Courtney, when you say you cannot just have someone of color in some sort of a leadership position. I am the second, I think, person of color that's had a kind of leadership position in my organization, the first Black woman, person that identifies as a Black woman. And, you know, of a 33-plus-year-old organization. And so that's also not lost on me, right? And I think it's really important to think about where, before we kind of go out into communities and do something with a community, organizations, I think, have to kind of take a step back and say, are we doing a thing to a community, at the community? Are we in conversation with the community? Who is community, and isn't community plural? So it's really communities, and how long that might take. You know, is there an appetite for that maybe you don't go out and just do a thing immediately? It requires a kind of sustained relationship building that might have to weather some different kinds of whatever's happening in the political landscape, the social landscape, the economic landscape. And are you willing to do work with the community, knowing that all of those things can change at any given time? And can this partnership sustain that? So when I think about, I'll give you an example. When I think about a program that I have worked with for the past, I don't know, I think about a program, and I'm hesitant to give a program because I'd like us to be thinking about practices. I think programs can come and go. So I'll say practice, working with schools, right? Working in K-12 spaces. The things that the pandemic really raised for us was how it was always complicated to work in that K-12 space. But what the pandemic brought to the table was, here's an acute issue that is happening across the social, economic, you know, just across the public and affecting myriad publics. And I was made aware of, here is a body of work, our work in K-12, for instance, is just one example, that can sustain that. And how do we know it can sustain that? Well, first of all, we're measuring it, and we're you know, keeping track of that. We're gathering data. That's really important, and reflecting on that in an active and ongoing way. But then also, when the work didn't end or stop or halt, it just shifted. It needed to shift. It needed to shift because of the moment. It needed to shift because of the resourcing was different. There were these shifts, but it didn't end. And so we then reflected on what was in place that allowed that work to be able to sustain itself through this acute moment. And what can we learn from that? And what can we continue learning from that and continue doing so that we can be thinking about sustainability? So that's one example. There's many others, but when I think about the work that needs to be done, particularly when we're thinking about inclusion, equity, accessibility, those kinds of things, it is a sustained work. And so what is it that we're doing in these organizations that allows for us to sustain that work? And it's not just resources. It's not just people of color that are, you know, maybe in prominent places in the organization. It's not just religion. It's a combination of things that need to be happening, sometimes all at once or in parallel.
Mhm.
Hello, Courtney. Hey, it's nice to meet you. I've not met you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you. Wow, you made so many good points, both of you. I'm thinking about you being ensconced in the, Dion, I didn't say hello to you. Hello.
Hi, Dr. Daniel.
this is so funny to me. I'm just gonna depart for a minute. This is so funny to me because those of you who are currently students or were students when I was teaching there still call me Dr. Daniel, which is hilarious and just marvelous. But anyway, it's I'm sure it's done with love, and I love that. Okay, so you've said so many important things. I'm thinking about you being in institutions and organizations. And this morning there was an article in the campus, the OSU campus news that talked about a study that is coming out of the Kirwan Institute. Maybe you guys saw it, about research that's being done in communities, okay, by OSU folk. And they might be students or they might be faculty. And it was so interesting to me because the questions that they asked, the issues that they brought up in that article were the same issues that we were talking about 10, and in my case, 20 years ago at the Ohio State University, and I think probably across the nation. And those questions are similar to what you're talking about. You know, they were asking, do we really, have we permitted the communities to have a voice? That's like the oldest community question in the world, right? Who has voice, right? And do you actually give someone voice, or do they already have voice and you just keep prohibiting them from using it? So that depends on how do you want to look at that. But I found it almost amusing to see the way the language was being used in this article, as if this was this great revelation now that the university has made about, hey, you know, we really need to listen to the people who are in the community. They need to have a sense of equity, and as you said, Dion, agency, and why haven't we done this? And so why don't we measure that? Why don't we go into the community and ask people, do you think you have this? And if you don't have this, how do you think you could get this? And, you know, how do you feel about the way that the folk from the Ohio State University are coming into your space and studying you? Now, you know, I'm sure you're detecting I have a particular position about this. You know, I am not sure that I feel that it's all good. However, I do believe that the willingness to now study it with presumably some grant money or whatever's coming out of Kirwan Institute is a good thing. That can only be a good thing. But one of the things that I've noticed outside of this article now, and taking into account what you have both said so beautifully, is that the definition of community has been all over the place, right? So when you ladies are working with community, and Jackie, I'm talking to you too, in a good way. When you folks are working with community, have you decided with whom you are working? And I think the answer in all of your cases is yes, you have. But it's interesting to me that transmitting that information from folk who are actually working inside to people who are not quite inside, don't have that co-membership, that's sometimes a tricky negotiation. I've been in committee meetings before where people will say, well, okay, well, we're doing community outreach. And I'll ask them, well, who are you talking about? You know, when you say community, and they all have different answers. And interestingly enough, most of the time the answer has nothing to do with the way that I would answer the question. Okay, I accept that those are legal and legitimate possibilities, that we're talking about the spaces that we know about. But it does trouble me that when we use this broad category, this naming that we're using as community, that maybe it's a wonderful thing that the definitions of community are all over the place, just like the definitions of diversity for universities. You know, the way that we define university is all over the place. And so I wonder, is that problematic? You know, is that something that keeps any of you from moving to the place where you think you need to be, or even to strategize or to name the place where you want to be? Because people keep coming in and saying, yeah, but I'm not talking about the same kind of community that you are. So that's a real question that I have.
Mhm, mhm.
Jackie?
It's so, I'm just really loving being the listener. But it's interesting listening to Dion because just thinking back when the Wexner Center first opened and we were in the short north, of course, the large institutions like the Wexner Center needed to do some outreach to inner city kids, right? And so came to us for, can we give you some free tickets to a show? And it was so good to have our team, because everything we do is a team, to be able to say, what do you want? What do you want? And it was to actually deeply engage. It was to have the visiting artists come to our space first. It was for the visiting artists to see our young people's talents. And the young people and the artists made the deal, to say, okay, we'll do this if you do this. And it was magic, but it also, they were able to start educating not only the Wexner Center, but other major institutions, because we're the little guy in town, to say, okay, if you want to engage with us, we need resources. We just don't want your little outreach activity. It's going to take our time to do this. What can you provide to us? And it taught us, we've always been deeply committed to paying artists and paying young people, but so often there's that imbalance of, oh, we're going to bring you this, so you should be so happy. And so it's been great to watch our young people develop their negotiating skills to say, this is who we are, and we will not be labeled. You will not label us. We are not inner city kids. We are not troubled kids. We are not disadvantaged. We are artists. If you can respect us, then we can play. So.
Wow. Again, too, I also am very much so enjoying this conversation and the points you guys are raising. And being, not only have we, troubled the word power, but we're also thinking about how we adding more nuance to the word community and being intentional about the way in which we're engaging with our work. I'm wondering if we can, I think we've touched on it a little bit with the different organizations that you all have engaged with and how you've moved and navigated this idea of community and community engagement. I'm wondering if I can ask this question, is that something unique about something unique about this panel is that you all done it in very different ways. A Courtney in a kind of a grant making institution in other ways. Dr. Daniel in academia and through your research, and then Dion and Jackie through different arts organizations. I'm wondering if you guys could talk about your trajectory and how you got to the place that you are now. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. If you could expand on that.
I love this question. So can I hop in there? Because this is one of my favorite kinds of things to talk about with folk is the meandering, road to to this work. And I will, and in full disclosure, I have studied with Dr. Daniel and I have worked with Jackie. for a long time. I worked with Jackie, probably 10 years or so. So in a community, in a kind of community-based way, but met Jackie as an artist that was curious and got a chance to then work with her later, got a chance to study with Dr. Daniel and sort of think about my work and how it was situated. So that's my full disclosure. And, after undergrad, I went into, I don't know, like so many young people with these ideals, and I want to work in the community. I definitely think I want to teach. There's something about learning settings that I'm really interested in. I'd like for there to be enough room in whatever space I'm in for me to also be an artist. And so I had to try out some different spaces, right? I had to try out the classroom and try out museums, try out rec centers. My actual first art education gig, if you will, was through a kind of AmeriCorps program that was doing arts work. It was a partnership with Greater Columbus Arts Council and AmeriCorps and Columbus Recreation and Parks. And that was my first kind of introduction right after undergrad into community-based art education. I didn't know it was community-based art education until I studied with Dr. Daniel and really started knowing how to sort of name this work that I was involved in or encountering later on in my studies, but got a chance to work with teams of artists. I like that Jackie talked about we work in teams. I think that's the best way, the most ideal way. At the WEX in Learning and Public Practice, we call them working groups. Many of us, our department used to be really siloed, and when I was promoted to director of that area, what I was most interested in was working groups where different people had multiple skill sets and knew how to do many different kinds of things. And that to me looked at sustainability. But anyway, so started off in rec centers, Columbus City Rec, and then really sort of fell in love with like a community-based practice. And sometimes we weren't making art at all. Sometimes we were just talking and being and feeling. Sometimes I was feeling just, I don't know, like a place where I could go after, at this time every day. And I felt welcome in this. I'm supposed to be providing this programming, and I felt welcome in this. So there's something about that where I'm excited to go, but work with young people. And then one thing led to another, where I was working pretty independently as a consultant, as an independent artist, working with lots of different organizations, including the one I'm employed with. So the Wexner Center for the Arts was actually a client, right? And Columbus Museum of Art and Franklin Park Conservatory, lots of different arts organizations. I worked with Jackie and then Capacity, now Transit Arts, the different iterations as an independent artist, and grew through that mode, and didn't go back to study more graduate work for 10 years after undergrad, working in the field, right? Is this something that I like? Is this something I'm interested in? Is this something that I want to be doing? Went back to grad school to wrap my head around how to articulate it. Who are the people that I'm in conversation with? Who are the practitioners before me? Who are the folks that are writing about this work? What are they calling this work? What do I think I want to call this work? And where do we meet in between? So it was a great kind of experience to go back to grad school with a kind of sense of the work, a sense of the field. And I'm really lucky to have done that. It was the hard way to do it because I was a full-time student. Dr. Daniel and I talked, hard, like how do you, I was a full-time student, and at the time had it, I think I've got 3 kids, had just my oldest son at the time, middle of grad school, had my middle kid. So, that's the hard way. That's sort of the hard route, is like going to grad school, working full time, and then also being a practicing artist. The thing that I was just talking to somebody else earlier today was the thread that has remained really consistent with any of the kinds of endeavors or gestures that I've done over my career is I've remained consistent with art education and community. Those were the things I really cared about. Those were the things that motivated me. Those were the things that when things got hard there were spaces that felt not inclusive. There were spaces that I did not feel welcome. There were spaces that I didn't fit the shape of that space, and I had to figure out how to navigate the work that I was really interested in doing. I was reminded, oh yes, these are the things that I really care about, and these are the things that are moving the work forward, art education and community. And so I really tried to make decisions within that realm because it kept me focused. And so worked in the community for quite a bit, and I still am a consultant. I still am a practicing artist. I take on projects here and there. there, but then started working at the Wexner Center full-time in 2005 from really just working with them as an independent artist. That's how they knew my work. Some positions came open, and I thought, I don't know, do I really want to be at one place when I'm at all these other places all across the state, all across, multiple communities, lots of different, and then I thought, well, you know what, there's a budget here, and there's there's some resources here that maybe I don't have as an independent artist. So I tried that on, and the institution is very complicated being in that space. I was not ready for that. I will be honest. Still hard. It's hard. It's a hard time in the institution, in organizations. It's not an easy place to be in. But I stay there, and this is the thing that I get excited about, even as it's there's been harm. I stay there because it's like really sort of holding space for the folks that do want to be inside these spaces and do think that there is an amount of transformative kinds of practice that can happen in these spaces. And I believe that, I really do. Even some days when I'm just like, oh my gosh, why? I stay there because there's space to be made. There's space to be held. There's work to be done. And this organization that I'm with is a part of a larger system that also there's work to be done. There's space to be made. And so I'm like, well, I'm just here in this one little nugget of a wider system that I hope making space here makes space, that has this ripple effect, right? And so year after year serving, now thousands of students and, dozens and dozens of schools across the, across the state, and working with lots of artists. We hire so many artists. I come from that. I come from a teaching artist background. I still am a teaching artist, being able to really make the case for why artists are a significant part of the contribution to our society, and to be able to articulate that to anyone that will listen, to folks at the bank, right, that might be funding a particular series of program, or board members or foundations, right, and really kind of being able to make that case. And I look and say, okay, I have this perspective from working in these different spaces, and now I am I can't even say at the table per se, but like in rooms and in spaces where I can articulate what arts programming, what arts education, what art and art making and artists are contributing to our society, and why it is important and foundational to who we are as human beings, and how our communities are made up, and how we are made up as a society. And when it's hard, I just keep going back to that, right? How I started, how I came up as an artist, how I've come up, inside of an institution, and what I want to, what's the kind of resonance or echo or partnership that I'd like to leave with folks that I'll never meet, and then who are the folks that I'm working with along the way, that I can say there is space here if you want it, if you desire it. If this is not the space for everyone, I'm very honest about that. It is a very challenging space to work in, institutions. But if you are curious about how these institutions function and what might be able to be changed inside of institutions, there is work to be done. And I'd like to think that I am in the business of, or endeavored in working with folks that are really interested in changing these spaces, because they are a part of larger systems that need to be changed. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then too, this, I think that connects back to this idea of holding space, and then having this, questioning, like if you have a space at the table even, and these ideas of endurance that you pointed out earlier too, I think incredibly important to point out. Would anyone else like to think about this question of your trajectory and considerations that you've taken?
I mean, if I can, I think my present role, my presence here has been me conceding control of my life to the universe to direct me where I should end up going. In that, I did a graduate program after deciding that, maybe I didn't want to do an MFA anymore. But to learn how to work within institutions specifically, in large part, Deanna, I think you mentioned this idea of being able to have a larger impact, right? I had been working as a fundraiser in organizations for a number of years. It all felt like every organization was narrowly focused on one corner of an issue and not being able to connect to the larger, the larger atmosphere of everything that was going on most of the time, because people got to focus on their own work. And so that was what led me to do a program called National Urban Fellows. A part of that program is they send you wherever it is that they send you to one of their partner organizations across the country to do a project. And I was fortunate enough to be sent to the Cleveland Foundation, where I ended up doing this project that has led to this role. But I don't know that I could ever have foreseen, when I was majoring as an undergraduate in English, African American Studies, and creative writing, getting to the point where, Dion, to your point, I can be within an institution and have these conversations about what's happening, what people need, and direct resources to those places. With regard to power, I had an organization leader who did not get a grant in a program that I did once, who was like, but you hold the purse strings. What do you mean you couldn't do this? And I'm like, I know that's what it looks like. But in fact, I can only review what I have and make recommendations to the board, who then decide what it is we will fund and what we will not fund. So for me, the positioning is utilizing my understanding and knowledge by getting to know the community. And Dr. Danielle, as you've mentioned, who are we talking about when we say the community? So when I say community, I mean whatever community this particular project or need represents, and translating that need to the people who ultimately are able to direct resources. In all fairness and all disclosure, sometimes it's great and sometimes it's very frustrating, the things that I know that I will not be able to do, or I'm not able to do in the way that the community needs. And in part, sometimes it's because an actual shortage of resources. Sometimes it will take a lot more to create that consensus and understanding among the people who actually do have the authority to approve funding to get there. So I like to take a long-term view of, we begin to lay the groundwork, we repeat messages, I utilize this position to speak for the community to the board, not in any other circumstance, and then translate what I understand to be the concerns of the board to the community so that they can use that information, use that knowledge for the next time around.
It's so wonderful to listen to you all. It really is. I was sitting here trying to figure out how far back I needed to think about this. And it's really a long way. So I'll edit it considerably. You with me, Jackie?
Yes.
It's the reason it's so wonderful to listen to you is that there is clearly evidence based on what you are doing, and it's visible what you're doing. There is clearly evidence of movement and of the ability to state, just like Jackie was saying with the kids that you work with, they say these are the conditions. This is how we want to do this. And you need to hear us if we're going to go on and talk some more. So as I listen to you, I'm hearing you say, these are the conditions. So now when I think about being a graduate student in the 70s and having my doctoral committee not understand what it was that I wanted to study, so I had to change my dissertation to something else in order to get them to approve it, because my original idea was more cultural, and they had no idea what I was talking about at all. And I remember thinking, okay, what is the point of doing a dissertation? It's a ticket, to something else that I want to do. So do I want to fight the fight with both feet planted in a world that is going to keep me here in this space for years? Or do I need to plant my feet a different way and say, you know what? I know exactly how to move through these conditions that you set up for me. And I'm
Hmm.
going to move through them in a way that is going to astound you. So I got transferred to the Department of Psychology out of art education for long enough to write my dissertation, then got transferred back into art education and took the exam there so that I could finish my degree and take my degree and walk away. That's when I realized that the terms of so many kinds of activities are so negotiable. They're absolutely negotiable. But one of my sons, my youngest son, was telling me the other day that without the exposure that community spaces give you in collaboration with formal spaces, like some of you are working in, without that collaboration, young people don't have a sense, a lot of the African-American kids, for example, in my sphere, don't have a sense of how to negotiate those spaces. And it doesn't mean that you have to kowtow to anyone. It means that you have to have a vocabulary, a lexicon of things that is enabling for you. And you have to be able to identify those things. So, moving through the decades of my life, I kept seeing that over and over again. The other institution that I taught in told me the same thing. I have to learn how to negotiate this space so that I can get what it is that I and others like me and around me need in order to move forward. I never imagined that now we would be looking at visual culture that is identified as Afro-American futurism, for example. I never would have envisioned that and never would have known what to call it, because the spaces that I were in, I went to dynamic spaces. I went to places where Muhammad Ali used to show up, and there would be FBI in the same room. So we would have to greet the FBI, even though we were not supposed to know that they were there. We'd have to greet the FBI, tell them that we hope they enjoyed today's activities, and then go on with whatever it is that we were planning to do. So, I'm from a different kind of activist space. I'm a child of the 60s. Looking ahead and now being able to see it so clearly, I'm fascinated by it. But I also recognize there is so much more to do. And you're doing it, and I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you say you're doing it. The ability to dedicate a space where this work can be done is amazing and wonderful. And you're doing it, right? So now we can bring people in, young people, old people, whoever they happen to be, and say, let me describe for you what this space is like, but let me also invite you to re-describe it
Yeah,
as it becomes necessary, right, Jackie? It's important to be able to re-describe that space, right? Okay. So I'm loving hearing you say that. I'm not going to go through my whole thing because we only have a few minutes, right? So there's no way that I'm going to be able to do that. I live through the work of the people who come after me, as well as the people who came before me. I'm just occupying a little space right now for this moment. But as I listen to you and as I reflect on the people who preceded me, this space is an energized space that is so full of electricity and possibility that is astounding to me to imagine what it is that others are going to do in this space, right?
wow. Oh, man. Oh, okay, that's everything I wanted to say. But no, I would never have said it so beautifully. I just wanted to say, I don't know why I'm here. I just know that the arts saved my life as a child. So without going to the whole long thing, we were a very, very low income family. I was the oldest of 6 kids, so I had all the responsibility of caretaking and had a mom who was deeply troubled with mental health challenges. And we were bullied constantly at school because we would get one outfit for the school year, and the hand-me-downs that didn't fit and the whole thing. So it was a nightmare. But the beautiful place for me, somehow my dad managed to trade something so I could go to dance classes, and I had a gift. And so when I was in dance class, nobody knew that I was poor. Everybody wore the same leotard. I had talent. So I stood out, and I was one of the top performers, I guess, because I was given this space to be my true self and to be seen for what I could offer versus what I didn't have. And the same thing happened to me in high school in the art room. And so just, and one other very important thing was that we had neighbors who had more financial resources. And so they saw my talent. I used to go to their house and their daughter would play piano and I would dance. So they would take me to dance concerts and I'd get to go to the Cleveland Ballet. I grew up in Northeastern Ohio, and different concerts that would happen, things I could never have seen. So it gave me this sense of possibilities, like, oh, I could be this. It gave me confidence because I could get up in front of a group of people and perform. And I truly don't know what would have happened to me if I didn't have those experiences and those people who believed in me. So I know that I just, for some crazy reason, my life has just put me in these spaces where I've been able to, I don't know, we dually magnetize each other, I guess. Somehow just amazing, magical people come to me, and we are able to have this energy to create more magic. And I'm just so grateful. Just being able to, if I have a superpower, it's to be able to see the fullest potential in people, even when the exterior is putting up a wall, especially with young people. And just that sense of people who have been hurt so much by so much rejection and misperception, to be able to say, okay, I see you, and to be able to kind of help cultivate and dig that out has been a great joy. And I just keep doing this because it gives me so much joy and hopefulness. So.
Well, Jackie, you might not think you know why you're here, but you enable people. I've seen you do it a million times. You enable people in ways that they didn't even know were possible. So I see you're still doing that. It's wonderful. And by the way, I owe you a piece of artwork that my students made for you about 15 years ago. I've still got it.
What? I would love it.
I'm going to get it to you. Okay.
Thank you.
You're
welcome. Just a series of powerful responses from you all, and I've really appreciated it. Again, like Dion pointed out, these idea of negotiating spaces, naming the space, and then negotiating it to get where you need to go, to do the things that you need to do for the people that you're trying to impact. Just incredibly powerful. I'm going to ask, we only have a little bit of time left, and we have a Q&A after this. I'm going to ask one more question, and this question is just centered around the context of this panel, thinking about that it was crafted by the Barnett Fellows students in this department. And I'm just wondering, for the students here, pre-professionals in attendance, what advice would you like to share? And I'm sure there's been bits and pieces that people have gleaned just from the other questions we've asked, but if there's any pieces of advice that you have based on your work and your experience and your trajectory, as we've talked about, that you'd like to share with us before we go into the Q&A.
Just real quick, I will say, take risks. In my experience, I have left well-paying jobs to go into a situation that was kind of starting fresh. For whatever reason, it just felt right. And just being able to step away from that ego that says, oh, I've got to be this, I've got an offer to go here, so I should do that. but instead just following your gut. And in my case, I know I'm very privileged and blessed that it worked out, but just being able to do the hard work, but take that chance and jump in and see where it takes you.
I think I would say, find your support system and make sure that it has people in it who are going to challenge you.
Mhm.
I would say the thing that occurs to you that seems obvious or simple probably isn't obvious or simple to a whole lot of other people. So put it into the room. Don't sit on it. Don't hold it back, because it's probably the thing that people actually need to know.
Mhm.
I love that support system that Dr. Daniel just said. That is, oh my gosh, that's a critical piece of this, is, you know, who that support system. I second that. I would also add all of these notes of guidance are just so important. I would know why know why you're in this work, or be willing to keep your thinking open to evolve why you are in this work. I find that this work is can be bigger than any one of us that's a part of this work. And I think it's important to keep checking in to make sure that it remains that way, and it doesn't ever become a part of this is my work, or this is my research, or this is what I'm really right, because then that can cause a lot of harm. And so it's really thinking about what's the collective work. I find this to be important collective work, and understanding that, knowing why you're in it will help, I think, when it gets hard, or when there are obstacles, when there is that, like Dr. Daniel talked about earlier, around negotiating, right? Negotiating that space. You will be able to quickly think back and say, this is what grounds me. This is how we move through. This is how we move through these complex conditions. This is how we move through something that feels like an acute context. This is how we move through, because there's this reminder of why you're in this work. And for me, it's beyond a job, right? Like, it's a job, it's a way to make a living, for sure. It doesn't pay well enough to be some end all be all. So we do have to have, we just have to have more, this field, there's work to do in that area too. But, this field, even as we're doing this mission-driven work, it requires a kind of dignity. We all deserve a kind of dignified life, and a kind of way that we can sort of live with a kind of dignity. And so knowing why you're in it allows for you to do that body of work, both inside the organization, and be thinking about how to have this wider way of thinking about that beyond the institution. So know why you're in it, and hopefully it's bigger than just yourself.
I muted myself when I was supposed to talk. Well, I just want to thank you all again for coming and sharing your expertise and your knowledge and your experiences in this panel. I think we're going to shift to the Q&A, and Robin has been looking at the questions that have been posted in the Q&A section. So I'm just going to shift to Robin really quickly, but again, I just want to thank you all for sharing so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again. I think we're off our echo chamber now. So we do have a couple of questions in our Q&A space, and you might be able to see them for yourselves, but I'll read them aloud for anyone who doesn't have that access. A challenge I have found is that however much support of local urban communities is a part of the supposed principles of a university, without the promise of a financial payoff, administrations are disinclined to invest in them outside of as a space for research. I've also noticed this creates an understandable suspicion in a populace who comes to see the university as another face of external authority acting upon them rather than a community that they have or can have a meaningful connection to. What ways out of this paradox exist?
Well, I think an interesting part of that, thank you for that question. It's a great one, and an oft repeated one year after year, after year after year after year. Okay. Huh? I'm sorry?
I apologize. My sound was off. We're trying to avoid echoes in the room because we're together in a room. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's okay. I thought maybe I had fallen into the pit again. Okay, so here's the thing. You know, the other folks here have been talking about agency and power. I think communities need to understand that it's already built in. A certain amount of agency and power are built in. So when the wonderful university folk come into the community and you know, they say, well, we want to do this and that. If I understand your question, the folks in the community have every right to say, no, we're not interested. We'll take care of that ourselves. You know, we'll look into it. We'll investigate. We'll do the research ourselves because we already know why we're doing it. We're motivated by something that has perhaps nothing to do with what motivates you. So I think one of the things that we have to always tell the folks who are all around the university, I mean, they're living their lives in communities that have been here for a long time, is that you always have the right to say, no, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could, you know, chime in, having been a university fundraiser for a few years, you know, one, sometimes with regards to, and this is just a real nitty gritty of endowment management, especially if it was an endowment that was made a long time ago at a university that is funding a significant amount of the operations, but has terms that don't keep pace or don't allow for, you know, funds to be utilized and or, you know, possibly can't be utilized at all at this point in time because the purpose for which they were given is no longer possible. For instance, I worked at Brooklyn College. They had an endowed fund for scholarships for students at the nursing school. There was no more nursing school. So that's just money that literally legally they couldn't do anything with, but sit until they took it to the Attorney General's office. And that's a costly exercise. And so you only would really do that and get relief from those restrictions if you had a number of funds that you could do at the same time. Does that make it actually easy or useful for anybody in real life? No, but one thing that was very powerful, honestly, was just knowing what the money was and where it was, and thinking through creative ways that it could be mobilized and utilized. And that, I think, is a very powerful thing to do. I don't know if anybody here even intends to go, but when you think about going into institutions, understanding where the money is and how it can be utilized and mobilized is a very, very powerful tool to have that sometimes intimidates people. But this is what I think of when you think about the people on the inside of an institution that can be the bridge, or that can be, you know, the gatekeeper in a different way than we think of gatekeeping typically. Instead of keeping people out, think about the ways to bring people along, to bring people in, to help them to understand what the resources are and how to position their requests. Because part of the problem, I think, that we see often is because of the way, the unwritten rules, the things that are unspoken about the way that things work. when we have people on the inside of institutions that can say, this is how this actually works internally. So target your request or your demand at this lane, then we might be able to get some shift. The rest of that, I don't know. I think it's capitalism, and it's kind of a feature, not a bug. But even with that as the stance, there are definitely ways I think that people of concern and conscience can act within these institutions and systems.
Thank you. Anyone else want to step in with that question?
I think, again, just remembering the intentions of the work. I think it's important to think about, to just remember, particularly when we're doing research or programming, or we're working within an organization or institution, that we are of that institution, even if we disagree with some of the practices of the institution, even if we would do things differently, even if, and on and on and on, right? There just could be these things that we just are not aligned with. We won't align no matter where we are. We won't align with everything that, whatever organization, we won't align with everything. We have to remember that perception, right? There's still that perception out there. What can you do? What can we do when we're doing this work that lessens that harm that so many institutions have done, sort of doing a thing on behalf of the institution, to set a group of people or to a community, and remembering that there's a long history of that. You might feel like, well, my intentions are not that, I'm not going to do that. But it doesn't matter that that's your intention or that you don't feel like you're going to do that. There's long histories of institutions doing that again and again and again. You already come with the baggage, even if that's not your baggage, or you think it's not your baggage, right? It's already there, it's already written, it's already ingrained. And so what is the work that needs to be done with that in mind, right? Even if you're like, well, I'm one of the good ones and I want to do a good thing and I want to, I'm not going to do this thing that has been done, but it's already been done. So the feeling's already there. And so the tone and the mood is already there. And so what are you going to do? You might be starting in the hole, right? So what are you going to do now? Knowing that. First thing first is knowing that, understanding the history. How has this organization or this institution worked with this community? Has it worked with this community? What were the results of that? That's why data and research and evaluation is really important, because you can begin to sort of set up a kind of history of change, if that's what you're after, which I'm hoping that that's what we're after, right? It's to say, okay, this was done in the past, and maybe you can't jump right into the research or into the program because there needs to be some trust that's built, and trust takes time, right? And so maybe that's also useful to consider with that question.
Thank you.
I'll just say again that I guess from the community side, because we are so often asked to be the laboratory mice, and again, to be able to negotiate, to say, is there a need that we actually have, that it would be beneficial for us to have that kind of support, and then what department would be meaningful for us to work with. And we've done that a few times. We've turned down opportunities many times. So I would say for people who are doing the research, I can't tell you how many times I have 6 different people over the course of a month asking us the same questions that they could find on our website. They could do some research on their own. Another department is already researched in detail, and it gets so exhausting because we're tiny and we don't have time to do all those meetings. So just having that awareness, making sure that you've really done your work before approaching those community members.
Oh, that's so good, Jackie, right? The labor, considering the labor. what kind of labor, like speaking of doing something to someone, right? Are you asking someone to do an amount of labor, particularly if you're looking to work with populations that that are exhausted in certain ways, that where there is chronic trauma, where there are these sort of chronic conditions, where it's complicated, right? And then you're wanting to do good, you're wanting to do something in a community, but really it requires a kind of beyond the capacity of the folks that are within that space. That's such a good point.
Thank you. Thank you all. This comes from the same individual who asked that first question. So this is for maybe for Dr. Daniel to start with, and then I think really for everyone. Is it still accurate to say that community is, quote, a collection of people who are unified by locality or not, similar circumstances and or history, shared interests and or spiritual linkages?
Who is that? Who is that trying to trip me up on my own words, right?
Somebody did their research.
Somebody did their work. I'm just gonna wade right in and say, absolutely. It is still true. Yes, yes. I don't think that part has changed. That's my quick answer. Is that your question? Whose question?
It came from an individual. I don't know if they put
Oh, okay.
themselves in anonymously or not.
That's okay. That's funny. Okay.
Does anyone have a yes and, or have you found in your work in community arts that you are thinking about or redefining in your mind or through your observations what community is? Like, is there a snapshot right now of a word or a phrase that and you can be thinking of a particular community in mind even as you say it, but that gives you a sense of like this is community right now in this place in this time.
I really love Dr. Daniel's definition, so I'm not going to even go there. But what I will say is these ways of thinking about communities or community, it's okay for us to continue to allow those to be shifting or evolving. That's all I would add to it, is that it's in some ways a community is an activated kind of conceptual framework, if you will, or space or condition. And I think it's constantly shifting.
Thank you. We have another question. This is for Courtney Barton. If you could speak to the movement for trust-based philanthropy.
Yeah. Trust-based philanthropy is, I think, a hot button term that a number of foundations utilize. And I think in theory it is good. I think saying trust-based philanthropy doesn't actually answer who trusts who or vice, is it that the philanthropy needs to trust the organization, the grant seeker, the community, or do all of these and more need to trust the grant maker? And then how do we get to this sort of trust-based system? If I'm seeing this question, yes, in COVID, a number of institutions completely and quickly altered their systems and policies and procedures, and philanthropy in a number of fields, but philanthropy specifically to mobilize grant making significantly faster, to loosen reporting requirements, just to make things easier. This is generally a positive development. Philanthropy is opaque, probably one of the most opaque systems that can legally operate in the United States, with very little in the way of must do other than give 5% of its assets every single year. And that's about it. that sort of conceit, that sort of setup does not generate a whole lot of trust. And so even if you are moving money quickly, the work to actually build trust has to be long and slow. So I think, I do think this work is progressing. I think if you look at, say, grant makers in the arts, they've been talking about trust-based philanthropy and or the components of trust-based philanthropy and what it means to sort of decolonize the work of philanthropy for a number of years. But there is so very little regulation with regard to philanthropy overall that makes it easy to say, yes, like the vast majority of foundations are moving in that direction. The vast majority of foundations in the United States are family philanthropies that really have no, regulation other than, again, to give out their 5% of their assets every year. And that can be for whatever it is that they want, as long as it's, for a charitable purpose. So changing the rules of philanthropy will require a lot more work on the part of foundations, I think. And there are a number that are moving in this direction, but there's still a very, very long way to go.
Thank you. Is there anyone else working with or near philanthropy that has some thoughts they'd like to share on that question? And thank you, Ms. Barton.
I think just a quick note on that is this idea of sort of trust-based philanthropy as a theory and then trust-based philanthropy as a practice. And that's all.
That aligns with so much that's come up today. Yeah. There are, we have a couple of questions that we hadn't gotten to. Oh, by the way, Dr. Daniel, the initial questions came from Jason Cox. He revealed himself to you. That is the individual who did his homework. But we would love to, the Barnett Fellows would love to know what, maybe in line with endurance and the long view, what does self-care, self-maintenance look like for you? Did you like our echo effect? Just keeping everybody on their toes today. What does self-care look like?
Man.
Answer the email when it's time. Like, don't spend all night laying around looking at your email. Don't do it. Do not do it. I say that because I do this sometimes. It's not a good idea though. You have to learn, I think, to create some clear boundaries for yourself in your own life, whatever that may be. I've been working from home for the last couple of years, so I need to work at this desk, right? Like I don't need to go sit on the sofa and work, but this way I'm able to keep this boundary of this is my workspace, this is my, my home space, even if it's just a mental trick in order to make it seem that way. But you do have to create your boundaries and stick to them, even when you are the one who would be violating your own boundaries.
That is such a good suggestion. Thank you for that. That is an excellent suggestion. My suggestion would be that you have a daily routine, which has to do with initiating kinds of affirmations for yourself. And I tell people who are in my age group, for example, look at yourself in the mirror every day. Do you recognize yourself? Are you still speaking English? Do people understand you? Do you still have goals? Can you name those goals? Are you able to argue productively in a variety of instances? And do you come in contact with young folks? That is a way of maintaining your mental health and your personal, the construction of your soul, the way you want it to go forward. For me.
At that rate, Jackie, I think you're about 12 years old.
Yeah, right, exactly. One thing I will say, no matter how much joy I get from what I get to do every day, take your vacation time. My husband and I realized that we had not had a real vacation in 19 years. He's a performer, touring artist. So if we went somewhere, it was when he was working. That's not healthy. So we were actually going to Portugal for 2 weeks, and no one is going to be able to reach me for 2 whole weeks. I'm working like crazy to prepare everyone for this. You cannot reach me. My phone won't work. I won't check email. But it's seriously, it's so easy to get caught in that just not stopping. And when you get to be a certain age, you think, maybe I could have stopped a little bit. It would have been a good idea. So don't do it.
Mhm. And
Or do it.
what I want to add to that is, I love what you said also, Jackie, is choose. Choose. I really, and that, whatever that means for you, whatever that word means for you, activate it and make sure that it's in your favor.
Oh, these are good. I'm taking good notes. All the mental notes. I really love all these suggestions, actually. I struggle with all of them. But I love your note about spending time with young folks. I truly believe that. Oh, so good. And it's just so important. And I do think that there's an energy there that just cannot be beat. Just half of the energy, and thoughtfulness and curiosity and just, I don't know, spending time with young people, so good. And when I say youth is a wide range for me, particularly as I continue aging. So, that means a lot of different things to me, including university students. I love spending time with university students. I would say too, I really love Jackie's about the vacation as well. I'm going to go to 2 weeks to an island, not like domestic island, but an island nonetheless. And after not taking a vacation, I'm not good at taking vacations. 1 week is totally dedicated, not doing much. Maybe I'll peek a little bit, but not doing much. The second week is a film festival. So it is kind of work related, but it's not, I'm not going to be sort of doing work, a little bit of work that next week. But 2 weeks away, just a different setting, right? Just somewhere else feels exhilarating and I cannot wait. That email thing, it's a battle. The struggle is real. I try. I'm perpetually, I'm both like behind on emails, like I catch up and then I'm behind and I catch up and then I'm behind. It's just perpetual. I would say, figure out the things that sustain you. Maybe it's good food. Maybe it's time with the ones that you care about and that care about you. Good sleep. I really believe in getting good sleep. Like Courtney said, those emails are not, you checking them at whatever time is not going to make them, it's okay to go to sleep. And this work can fool us because it can be so human and so passion driven. And we can believe in the mission that we blur the lines between our lives and how we make a living. And I would say, just be careful with that. Be careful with your life and how you make a living. You can care about all of it. Just really continue to check in about that, because the lines get blurry really quickly in a field like this, because it's the arts, right? We love it. It's culture. We love it. It's fun. It's like, oh, this is fun, until, you're doing a lot and you don't even realize. And so while it's an exciting life, it can be, and it can also be hard work. It is not the life. I tell people, I don't know. I don't want to say no one's gonna care about your resume, but at the end of the day, right? Like, it's just, these things are nice, but at the end, relationships are also nice, right? Friendships, time away from things, your own time, being by yourself, all of that is really important. I know you got to write some stuff. I know you got to get your articles in, you got to get your publications. I get it. I know. You got to teach. I know. You got to do some programming. But at the end of the day, think about what sustains you, because this this field can, you're pouring out a lot. And if you don't fill up, and if you don't care for yourself, the pain can come quick and before you realize it. And then all of a sudden you've got like a chronic pain. You don't know where it came from. It's because it's 10 years deep.
Mhm.
So
And don't forget to eat real food. Donuts will not sustain you. Drink coffee. The bane of my existence.
so true.
But,
Facts.
But seriously, walking and eating real food. Start early.
I love that. Start early. I think that's got to be at the front of every single offering that you shared, and how generous. I too took copious notes on self-care and on everything else. I want to thank you for participating in the question and answer period. We're going to hand off to Emily for a wrap up.
Is your sound off? No. Sorry, guys. Thank you all so much again for tuning in, and a huge thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your very busy lives to be with us today and share some great conversations. So virtual applause for you. And again, we apologize for the technical issues. We've never done a Zoom webinar before, but now we know for next time. So we really hope that everyone enjoyed today's discussion, and we hope that you have been expanded in your perception of the powers and potentials of community arts. Have a great evening and rest of the semester, everybody involved in the university, and be on the lookout for information regarding the recording of today's panel discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.